I've always liked life. It's a pretty vague statement, but it's true. I saw it as a kind of an equation when I was a kid. You know, life is good, no life is bad. So as a kid, I could not bring myself to pick dandelions on the playground because that would kill them. I actually wrote my college entrance essay about how I don't squish bugs in the house. You know, my parents would see a silverfish running along the baseboard, they'd run after it with a rolled up magazine, and I'd jump in with like a paper cup and an envelope, like a little action hero. No! Catch the bug, put it outside, save its life. And I like life so much, I decided that I should become a biologist. And I figured that that's what makes sense in the moral equation, that I should use my life to help sustain and promote life. It's kind of a foolishly altruistic way to choose a career, but that's what happened. A few years ago, I was getting my PhD. I was working on designing new drugs for malaria, and some of the drugs that we were working on in my lab actually started to look like they might work. They were killing the malaria parasite in test tubes. And so one day my advisor came up to me and he said the words that I had hoped he would never say. I think you should start animal testing. Now, my stance on animal testing is probably the same as a lot of yours. I know it's necessary, I know it's helpful, I know that countless human lives have been saved because of testing on animals. I know that countless animal lives have been saved because of veterinary vaccines and agricultural medicines that have all been developed that could not have been developed without testing them on animals. I know all this, but I never wanted to be the one to do the tests myself. And there's a name for this particular moral position. It's called hypocrisy. And for most of us, it's a really easy stance to take because it's not going to come up, right? No one's going to run into your office on Capitol Hill on Monday and say, here, inject this into a rat. And if they do, you call security because that's weird. But suddenly there I was doing these mouse tests. The very first thing I had to do was a basic toxicity test. So before you can test whether your drugs will cure malaria, you test whether the drugs themselves are innately toxic. And the way to do that is inject it in different amounts into 4 mice. And then you observe the mice for 2 weeks and see if they die. And then when the mice didn't die, I killed them. I had to kill them and basically take them apart. Take their organs, separate the organs, section them, look at them under the microscope, and then see that everything came out okay. And this allowed me to write the sentence, gross pathology appeared normal. So that was that equation. 4 mice for 4 words. And let me tell you, you have not known discomfort until you have been labeling a rack of test tubes of formaldehyde, mouse 1, brain, mouse 2, lungs, and mouse 1 and mouse 2 are looking at you from the cage and they're like, what's that? What are you doing? What's going on? What do those markings mean? What's going to be in the tubes? I'm so sorry. I used to apologize to the mice all the time under my breath as though it were actually going to mean something to them. After the toxicity test, I finally got to test whether the drug was going to work. So the way you do that is you give a mouse malaria, then you give it the drug, and you see what happens. And the best I possibly did was that our drugs allowed the mice to live for 9 days after getting malaria instead of 5 days. That's it. Not really a stellar result. But my advisor didn't want to stop there because now he had a student in his lab who was working in the animal facility, which he never had before. And so he said, well, what if you try it again with a slightly different strain of malaria? How about if you increase the dosage? How about if you lower the dosage? How about twice a day? How about 3 times a day? How about in combination with other drugs? And the next thing I knew, I was doing these larger and more complicated tests and killing more and more mice. I think the procedure that I hated the most was something called exsanguination. If you remember your Latin roots, you can pretty much figure out what that means. See, in order to give a mouse malaria, you have to take the infected blood of another mouse and inject it into that mouse, which means there are some mice whose only job is to live, get malaria, and then get exsanguinated. And to exsanguinate a mouse, you knock the mouse out. It's not going to feel anything, but it's not going to wake up either. You put a needle in the side of its heart while the heart is still beating, and you draw out all the blood. And if you pull too hard on the needle, you collapse the wall of the heart, you don't get any more blood, you've wasted a mouse. That happened a few times. It was not fun. I hated it. I hated every minute of it. The mice actually got even once. I had a syringe full of malaria-infected mouse blood, and I had a cage full of mice, and I was reaching over to take the lid off the cage, and I accidentally stuck the needle into my hand. I was fine. Humans can't get mouse malaria, but I had to do a whole day's worth of OSHA paperwork, so that was my penalty. I could see the mice giving each other little high fives. I guess it was high fours. They only have 4 fingers, don't they? But at this point, all the altruism that I had dreamed of initially, becoming a biologist, that was gone. I was no longer going to cure malaria, going to save lives. All I was doing was generating sentences for a scientific paper that no one was ever going to read. And this is a paper whose vague conclusion was going to be, chemical compounds of this class may show promise as clinical antimalarials. That's it. Because that's what you do in early drug discovery. You write a paper that says, may show promise, and then you walk away. And you say, well, it's not my place to actually develop the drug. Someone else is going to come in and do that. But I knew that no one was going to come in and do that. And they shouldn't anyway, because these drugs didn't work. So one day I woke up in the crappy row house I was living in Baltimore, and I was getting ready to go to work at the animal facility. And I went to go take a shower, and as soon as I walked in the bathroom, I noticed there was something in the toilet. And it was a mouse. It was a big gray mouse. There was an episode of This American Life a couple months ago, some of you might have heard it, where a guy in New York talked about a rat that came into his toilet through the sewage pipes. This was nothing that dramatic. I knew exactly where this mice came from. This mouse was the reason that we had all of our cereal and Tupperware in the house. The house was full of mice. It was a terrible house. But this mouse had clearly fallen into the toilet bowl. Someone left the lid off, and he couldn't get out because the sides were too slick. And I noticed when I got closer that the mouse would let himself dip under the surface of the water for like a long time, like 10, 15 seconds before coming up for just a second. This mouse had clearly been in there a long time, and it was exhausted. And I didn't know it yet, but I would go on to kill, for my research, 261 mice. But I thought at that moment, if I could just save this one mouse, I don't know, it was early in the morning, I wasn't thinking yet. If I could save this one mouse, I might somehow be able to reconnect with that little boy who wouldn't pick dandelions. Because really, how the hell did that little boy grow up to do what I'm doing? And I knew how I was going to save the mouse, because it's the same way I used to save bugs. I just needed a cup and an envelope, but a big one. So I went to the recycling bin, and there was actually an empty coffee can, a nice big coffee can in there. I took a big piece of cardboard, and I scooped the mouse up, and I got ready to clap the cardboard over the top. But as soon as the mouse was in the coffee can, I realized that I didn't have to cover it, because that mouse was not going anywhere. It just laid there in the side of the can, panting. So I put the cardboard down, and I walked downstairs carrying the mouse like this. I walked down on the front lawn in my bathrobe, and I laid the mouse in the grass there, and I went back in the house. And I took a shower and got dressed, got ready for work, and when I went out the front door, I wanted to take a look at the spot where I'd left the mouse, where I'd set him free, just to give myself that good feeling again of, yes, you did something in the other direction today. And that's when I realized there's a difference between bugs and mice. So you can put a bug outside in any weather, but if you're going to put a wet mouse on your front lawn, make sure it's above freezing. I made a mouseicle. So I don't know where I fall in the moral equation. I realized that day how imbalanced that equation was getting. I guess I showed the world that I'm not a hypocrite. Or maybe I'm more of a hypocrite for killing the mice while apologizing to them. I don't know. I think the only thing I know for sure is something I realized that morning. So right now, I still work on malaria, but I don't actually work with mice. I'm working on a vaccine with a company that I think is actually going to work and hopefully will start saving lives in the next 5 years or so. I really believe in this vaccine. And for my sake, it had better. Because all I know is that in the grand moral tally, I'm already 262 mice in the hole. Thank you.